B'siyata d'shmaya, we're going to begin this week's shiur on parshas Eikev. We have some incredible teachings that we're going to be learning together be'ezer Hashem from Reb Tzadok and the Mei HaShiloach and the Kedushas Levi and Rabbi Nachman's Chussi Hagan Aleinu. Really deep and fundamental teachings, like we always try to learn, not just a nice idea, a nice vart. Sometimes we speak about how oftentimes people confuse Chasidus with just a nice idea, something nice to say over, something cute, a little remez in a pasuk. But the truth is that of course, every single expression from the tzaddikim, every story, every mashal, every remez in a pasuk is trying to convey a very, very deep truth, is trying to convey a different facet and a different aspect of that which is fundamentally one at the core, and that which is very difficult to express. And so we need so many different ramazim, and we need so many different mishalim, and we need so many different Torahs, and different hints, and different psukim, and different gematrias, and different ramazim to be able to really knock it into us, these foundational ideas that we need to walk with our whole lives. That even if we were to forget one of the ramazim in a pasuk, we can't let go of the idea, because the idea is one that we have to bake into our hearts, bake into our souls, because we can't survive in the final generation without these teachings. So what a schus, what an absolute privilege to be able to learn the words of the tzaddikim together with you. And I appreciate you taking time to tune in to this particular shiur when there's so many shiurim and so many people to learn with and to listen to. And so it really means a lot to me that you're joining. And be'ezer Hashem, let's begin. I'm going to share my screen so we can see the sources together. So give me 1 minute. Okay. So you guys can see it? The source sheet? Okay, great. So let's begin b'siyata d'shmaya with Hashem's help with the teaching from the Mei HaShiloach, from the Heilige Ishbitzer Tzaddik, Chussi Hagan Aleinu, in volume 2 of the Sefer Mei HaShiloach. And the Tzaddik is going on the pasuk, V'zachartas Hashem Eikecha. We know that Devarim, like we've mentioned in the past year, I think we only had one, actually, parshas Devarim, where we mentioned that Devarim is really the chief Musar sefer that there is. Beyond Pirkei Avos and beyond any teachings, moral teachings, ethical teachings of Chazal that are scattered around Shas Bavli, Yerushalmi, that are scattered throughout the Midrashim, Sefer Devarim really, where Moshe Rabbeinu is giving over to Am Yisrael what it looks like, what the vision is for the Jewish life, what the vision is for the Jewish experience, for the Jewish enterprise, what that looks like. That's the deepest Musar, and that's the deepest and clearest sort of guide book, right? And the sort of instruction manual to understand how we are to live. And so in this week's parasha, Moshe Rabbeinu says, "V'zachartas Hashem Eikecha." You shall remember HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ki hu anoisein lecha koyach lasis chayil. Because it's the master of the world who gives you strength, lasis chayil, to do anything that's possible for you to accomplish in this world. And the Mei HaShiloach says, Chussi Hagan Aleinu, Zehu Iker. This is the absolute fundamental axiom of Yiddishkeit, of a real avodas Hashem, is lizkaras hanoisein b'chal davar, is to receive things in life, is to look around our lives and to understand that we have things. There are things that are ours, like Reb Leivish Hundert spoke about in the Tzitzis video, when he spoke about, which we released on Sunday, Be'ezer Hashem, a new project that there will be new videos every Sunday on the mitzvah of Tzitzis. And he spoke about it, the mitzvah of Tzitzis has to be lachem, and has to be ours, right? And there are certain things in life. There are our children, right? Our families. There's parnasa. There's food and drink that we have on the table, that we have in the fridge. There are things that belong to us. But the Mei HaShiloach says that the ikr, the absolute foundational concept that a Jew has to walk with all the time, is lizkaras hanoisein b'chal davar, to remember who it is that's giving us these things. Not that once gave us these things and now we have them, but is consistently, constantly giving us these things. Like we know, HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't just create the world, but He's recreating the world every split second. B'devar Hashem Shomayim nasu u'barach piv kol tzavam. It was with the words of God that the heavens were created, and the pasuk says, "La'olam Hashem devarcha nitzav b'shamayim." It's not just once HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke the words Yihira and a Shomayim came into being, and that's the sky that stretches above our heads in the beautiful summertime, that blue sky. That's not what it is, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, but rather each and every moment, each and every split second, God is recreating the world, is emanating the world into being. That the only reason that there's a heaven above us is because HaKadosh Baruch Hu's words, Yehi Rakia, are perpetually echoing within that space and creating and recreating each and every moment that sky above us. And we have to remember and we have to recognize, Gary, it's such a blessing to see you. Thank you so much for tuning in. Heilige Gary, wow. So this is what it means. This is what it means to be able to understand that everything that we have is consistently being gifted to us, being given to us. We find that when it comes to Vidoy Meisters, when a Jew goes ahead and gives the necessary tithes, right? He gives the Meisters that he's supposed to give to the Levi, to the Kohen, all the different Meisters. So a person goes, and a person, after giving the Meisters, he does something called Vidoy Meiser, where he proclaims that he has given all of the Meisters that he was obligated to give, that he fulfilled his obligation. And part of that is, I have not gone ahead and transgressed and passed over your mitzvos, and I haven't forgotten. The Isal Zeb Gemara in the Gemara explains in Brachas, Memam Beis, Lo avarti. What does it mean, Lo avarti? Not just that I didn't give, not just that I didn't refrain from giving the Meisters, but I have not passed over from blessing you, from understanding that you are the shoresh of bracha. When we say Baruch Atah Hashem, at least according to one opinion in the Rishonim, it means that you are the source of all blessing. Baruch Atah Hashem, you are the source from which everything comes from. When I lift up a cookie, we're going to talk about food to eat. When I lift up a piece of pizza, when I lift up a salad for the more health conscious chevra, when I'm lifting up a food that I'm about to eat and I make a bracha on it, what that means is that I'm recognizing that this thing that I'm about to consume, this thing that I have, is emerging in this very moment. Not that it was given to me once. It is literally being handed to me. And it's literally being gifted to me. I think that I'm holding it, that it's sitting in my hand, that gravity is causing it to sit in the center of my palm. No, there's an invisible hand from the Master of the world that's gifting this to me right before I eat it, until that point that I consume it within me and it becomes part and parcel of my being. Baruch Atah Hashem, you are the source of all blessing. And so I've realized in giving Meister that everything that I have, and this was their parnasa, I mean, you can fill in the blank, any parnasa that a person makes, whatever a person's involved in. So today we're not on the field, cutting crops and filling our silos with grain and having to give Meister, but fill in the blank, whatever it is. And today also we have a mitzvah, it's a machlokas, whether it's Yiras or Rabbanan, outside of Eretz Yisrael, inside of Eretz Yisrael, it's all sugya. But al kapanim, there's a concept of meiser, to give a tenth of what we make, a chomesh, to give a fifth of what we make. The tzaddikim are makbid on a chomesh, but to give a tenth of what we make. And to say, Lo yavartim levarechacha, in this action, I'm realizing that everything that I have is not just been given to me, but is consistently being given to me each and every moment. What does it mean, these words? I haven't forgotten. Milahaskir shimcha alav. To be able to look at this thing and to pronounce your name upon it, to realize that it emerges from your godliness, to be aware that everything that we have physically is permeated with the presence of the Master of the world, is permeated with the love of the Master of the world, is permeated with the desire of this infinite being to relate to me, to have a relationship with me. An amazing thing. And the same thing when it comes to Divrei Torah. Listen to these words. It's so foundational and fundamental, particularly for the guys on the call that are involved all the time in Limud Torah, for the women as well. If a person is going to sit 10 hours a day and learn, and a person is going to be in front of a Gemara, in front of a Mishnah, in front of Tanakh, in front of Chasidus, in front of Musar, in front of Kabbalah, whatever it is that a person is engaged in learning, that the Nefesh HaChaim tells us of the spirit of godliness and the spirit of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence and the holiness of God's presence fills the entire Torah b'shaveh equally, whether it be Agada, whether it be Halacha, whether it be Tehillim, whether it be Tanakh, it makes no difference. But whatever we're sitting in front of, if we sit for hours and hours, but we're forgetting the Nosein HaTorah, we're forgetting this aspect in which the Torah that we're learning is coming out of the mouth of the Master of the world perpetually, and that we're not reading dry words off a book that has already been given to us 2,000 years ago, more than 2,000 years ago, thousands and thousands of years ago on Har Sinai, but rather, like HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Anochi Hashem Eikev, he began the 10 Commandments, and the Gemara and Shabbos tells us, Anochi is a Rosh Tevis, Ana Nafshi Ksavis Yahavis. I, says the Master of the world, my soul I have written down and I have given to you. And then each and every moment, because again, all of physicality, everything that we perceive to be existing in our reality is perpetually being created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so when we're learning Torah, we have to remember the Nosin HaTorah. We have to remember that Hashem is Hamalami Torah L'Am Yisrael, that He's literally sitting with us. He's sitting with us right now. Every word that I speak that's coming out of my mouth and that enters into your ears and that you're processing and thinking and is hopefully going from our minds down to our hearts. This is being spoken by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. These are the words of God, the words of Torah that we're learning. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is gifting to us these words, and He's present, and He's really real, and He's here, and He loves us. So He says, Im eina adam zeicher noisein haTorah, when a person doesn't remember the giver of the Torah, ein chachmasei nechsheves leklum. Very harsh lashon. A person can be a baki shasu paiskim and learn for decades, and a person can amass an entire bookshelf of Torah knowledge to the point that Chazal tell us that a person can become, so to speak, like a walking Sefer Torah. But if a person was all the time constantly going ahead and learning in a way that was detached from the Nosen Torah, that was detached from attempting to build a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so that the Torah should change us, so that we should become elevated as a result of our Torah, so then it's like a Sefer Torah that has a psul. There's something puzzle about it. There's something improper. There's some element, necessary, foundational element that's been missing. We have to remember the Nosin HaTorah. We have to remember who it is that we're doing this for. And so often throughout history, there were different movements that decided, for one reason or another, obviously all b'hashgacha aliyayna, to accentuate certain aspects along the tremendous spectrum, the diverse spectrum of contact points with the divine. There were certain movements that focused on Tikkun Amidas. There were certain movements that focused on the concept of Mashiach. There were certain movements that focused on Shabbos Kodesh. There were certain movements that focused on Eretz Yisrael. There were certain movements that focused on the concept of the Tzaddik. And Kulam Ahuvim, Kulam Bruim, we need them all. Of course, each of them is shining that aspect of Torah which they grabbed and they made the headquarters of their outlook. But we have to understand that all of these are not the ends. They are only ach v'rak, the means. They are only the means to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They're only different entry points, so to speak, that a Jew who's really trying to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu properly needs to enter into all of them, has to visit from one to the other and enter them simultaneously. But we have to realize that that's not the hallway. That's not the ballroom. That all of those are merely hallways to be able to connect to Eretz Yisrael, not just to it for the end of connecting to Eretz Yisrael, but through Eretz Yisrael to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Not just to connect to the concept of the tzaddik, but through the tzaddik to the master of the world, and never to lose the focus of why we're doing this in the first place, of that being with whom we are being called perpetually to enter into a relationship, utilizing all of these different entryways to that ballroom of closeness of Kiras Elikim Litayv. Therefore he says, Hitzav Hashem Yisbarach, HaKadosh Baruch Hu made it so that Adam lo yuchal lichyas v'lo machal. An amazing thing. Ever think about this? Why shouldn't it be that a human being gets up in the morning and he has his sleep that refreshes his body, and he's able to go the whole entire day based on the sleep and the refreshment that he was able to attain, and then he goes to sleep the next night and he wakes up the next morning and he goes onward. What's this concept of eating and drinking? What is this? Why do we need to be powered by physical foods and physical drink? A spiritual being, even the tzaddik oichel asayva nafshe, right? The tzaddik who doesn't eat for a taiva, but he still eats because he needs to keep his body alive. What's the inyan? Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu create the world in such a way that there's a concept of food and drink? Says the Mei HaShiloach HaKodesh Baruch Hu established that a person shouldn't be able to eat and shouldn't be able to live without eating. Every couple of hours, he's reminded by a growling stomach and a certain weakness in his bones that he needs to eat again. What's the pshat? So that a person should perpetually be in a state of lacking, of dependency. The yitzrach is shtadlus rav, and a person will need to work. A person will need to make a parnasa. A person will need to make the necessary shtadlus to be able to have food to put on his table, kipshuto. And so that consistently, every couple of hours, we're reminded that we're mikabel. And this is one of the inyanim of a fast day. Why it's so important is to be able, one of the aspects of why it's so impactful, this concept of a fast, of not eating for a day, together with the removal from Gashmias that allows us to connect, right, on a little bit of a loftier level, to be able to remove our focus from the physicality of the world and to direct our gaze on the divine, for sure, right? There are many aspects of the fast. Like we say in Tefillah Zaka, it's like a carbon, right? That we're with the niyat of the dam, that the blood gets a little bit thinned out as a bechin of a carbon. There are many aspects of why a fast is important, but one of the aspects of why it's so beautiful and why it's so impactful when we come to the end of a fast day, that it enables us to connect to a spirit of tshuva, that it enables us to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu on a deeper level, and the reason is because we recognize how weak we are. We recognize that even the most powerful person in the world, who has in front of him on a panel all of the nuclear, buttons, that is able to mamish change the world in a second with one word that he utters, with one decision, one diplomatic move that he makes, he can change the face of reality, the face of nature. If such a person would go for 2 days without eating, he would be rendered completely incapacitated. He's weak. Human beings are weak. We're basar v'dam. But we have to realize that our weakness is our strength. That the more that we recognize that we're essentially weak, the logical progression of our essential weakness is our essential dependency, and therefore our essential relationship with the master of the world, who continuously gives us that ability to survive and to thrive. And so a person can look in the mirror and realize, Gewalt, I'm so weak, I'm such a little puny person. But we have to understand that within that thought of weakness is this empowerment to realize, but Al Kol Panim, I'm alive. Al Kol Panim, I've made it for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, whatever it is, years. Al Kol Panim, somehow, whenever my stomach growls, I'm able to feed myself. Chaz Hashem, we should all be zochet parnasa tova for our entire lives and never know what it means to lack, and never know what it means to go hungry, not us and not our children, not our grandchildren, la'ol me'ad, be'ezer Hashem. But to be able to understand how beautiful this is, that everything that I've taken for granted in the sense that I've been able to survive, that I've been able to thrive, it's indicative of this, that there's someone who loves me, that there's someone who provides for me, that there's someone who takes this weak little nothing that's essentially a corpse, so we should all live long and well till 120, but essentially is a lifeless piece of flesh, of Afar min Adama, and is breathing into me the Ruach, and is giving me the ability to maintain that Ruach within me through Meichel and Mishta, through food and drink. The Yizkar Samashpia, to recognize and to remember who is giving us everything. V'zehi Malas Yisrael, and he says this is the tremendous, wonderful trait and quality, the unique quality of the Jewish nation. That they're not like the rest of the world that's blind to the giver and that constantly takes and never thinks about the shorish, where things are coming from Bechlal. Never thinks about who packaged all the nutrients into this apple, like Rav Victor Miller would be marich. All of us know, right, how he would look at every single tiny piece of fruits and vegetables and anything natural that he would take, and he would look at it in his hand before he ate it, and he would be misboning from the Shar Habachina and Chavas Halabavas, to be able to focus and to realize this was pre-packaged for me. It's a beautiful, wonderful thing, mamish, to think about. You open up a watermelon, it's just so perfect. You open up an orange. Who packaged all of those little, tiny compartments of liquid so perfectly in that little slice, and that the slices all come together and you can just divide them so perfectly. If you don't want to take a bite and get all messy, you could peel off each slice and eat it individually, and that delightful burst of refreshing juice that comes into your body, that doesn't just taste good, but that gives you essential nutrients to keep you healthy. And Roiv of the world is eating oranges their whole life, and they never think for 1 second, who packaged this for me? Any person would come to their house and find an Amazon package outside and open it up and find something wonderful and not stop to think for a second, like, where'd this come from? Who gifted this to me? Nobody in their right mind. And one orange has more wisdom than anything that you can receive from an Amazon package. So Am Yisrael have this beautiful quality that we're always remembering, the Mashpia HaTayva. And therefore, when we're eating, we're not just eating in a gashmiistic way. We're not just eating in such a way that's mindless and that's with a lack of consciousness. But because we're remembering the giver, we're we're connecting this little prat, this little differentiated particle of physicality up to its source in the spiritual world, and Mamela, there's a tremendous amount of shefa that is able to fill this thing and provide us with far more vitality and energy, spiritually speaking, than just another person who eats this without anything. And even if we're not conscious of it, even the lowest Jew in the world picks up a cup, right? Not a tinik shenishba, a person who doesn't know, but a person who knows, who's been mechunach properly, even if he doesn't have kavana, he makes a bracha before he eats. And some were sub-spiritually. Of course we try to have a kavana. That's the whole thing with the Lost Princess Initiative. We're trying to bring back the kavana. We're trying to bring back consciousness. B'li she'elah. That's what Hasidus is about. But even this person, just the fact that there's a pause, just the fact that there's a disconnect, and if a person would be conscious and think and not be distracted, of course, he would say, I want to go ahead and to make that this bracha should be a vessel for recognizing and realizing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving me this thing, that this thing was created by someone who loves me, that elevates the eating experience to a lofty, lofty level, that connects us to the shorish, to the source. Every food, like Chazal tell us, have a special skula, have a special thing that they're good for. For example, wine that that makes the heart joyous. The pasuk in Tehillim, yayin is samach l'vad enosh. Wine gladdens the heart. Tamarim, for example, dates, meser ad aga, remove the worry. The Gemara in Ksubis tells us. And we find in the Gemara and Brachas that there are certain things. There are certain grains, there are certain inyanim that are detrimental to a person, that bring about certain illnesses as well. And the fact that there are 5 kinds of grain. Why wasn't there 6 kinds of grain? Why isn't there 4 kinds of grain? Why isn't there just 1 kind of grain that's going to give us all the nutrients necessary for us? Why 5? And obviously there's tremendous depth here, that in each and every kind of grain there's a special spiritual skula that's associated with the letters that make up the name of this particular grain. There's a certain spiritual spark that's in barley, for example, that's not in wheat, and that's in wheat, that's not in spelt. And each of the kinds of grain contain within it a spiritual skula, spiritual wonderful blessing. V'chein man, he says, right? So he says, "Shedavka b'minim elu yikabel adam koyach v'chizik." It's davka, these things that satisfy a person, that give a person strength and vitality. V'chein masha amru shir kazayis. Why is it that all the time when Chazal want to speak about a respectable amount of food that's considered an achila for roiv shiurim, right? When it comes to halachas that with regard to eating, that it's always the shir kazayis, right? You have to eat a kazayis. Why Why like an olive? What's the omik of that? What's the depth of that? Says the Mei HaShiloach, he says clearly, Sheshem and Moral Reishis Chachma Yiras Hashem, because oil is always hinting to the concept of Reishis Chachma Yiras Hashem, of Chachma that's associated in the Psukim with Shemen Mishchas Kodesh, right? The Shemen that would anoint the forehead of Aaron HaKohen and all the Kohanim to anoint them into the service of a Kadosh Baruch Hu is associated with Chachma. That Shemen always rises to the top. And so, says the Mei HaShiloach, when Chazal tell us that the shiur, when the Torah tells us that the shiur for eating as a kazayis is trying to teach us that in everything that you'll eat there's tremendous chachma, that everything that you're eating is connected and drawing from that shorish of divine chachma. Rag Yizkar, said, right? So Sha'alizeh, hu kol ha'inyanim. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is trying to communicate to us that we should never take life for granted. We should never take the things we're eating for granted. We should never take all of the parnasa and all of the wonderful things that become ours for granted. Yichya Adam, like the pasuk says, we don't live because of the physical food. We live because of the divine spark that's in the food. And here's the big cloud. It's very important. The more cognizant when we're eating that we are of the divine spark within, the more we're going to be able to become sustained on a spiritual level from the divine spark that's there, because it is all talui and how conscious we are when we are eating. That's to be found in the depth of each and every item. And with this we're davening that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give us and give to us all of the strength and the gevura within everything that we find, to recognize the strength of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to recognize the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu says any extension of days that you'll experience is ki bi yir b'yomecha. It's me that is giving you life. It is me that is giving you sustenance. It is me that is creating and recreating every second all of the world and the physical world that you're partaking of. And therefore, to be conscious of this, and hopefully in our being conscious of it, to be able to tap in to the spiritual sustenance and to be able to fill our lives and our hearts and our souls with the presence of God that's to be found in that thing. So I just want to quickly bring in Reb Tzadok that speaks about this nikuda of remembering the nosein haTorah, of remembering who it is that we're serving, to be in touch, not just with what we are being given, but who is giving it to us all the time. That's the fundamental foundation of everything that we're trying to communicate. And this piece is in the beginning of Tzikas HaTzadik, right in the beginning, Ois Beis. And Reb Tzadok says an amazing thing. Reb Tzadok says, Brachas l'rosh tzadik, the pasuk says. Blessings upon the head of the tzaddik. So he says, because of this pasuk, he comes to answer the question of why did Chazal put that brachos should be the first mesechta? What's pshat that brachos is the beginning of Shas? There are many answers given. Many of the Rishonim deal with this question, Rishonim and Achronim. But Reb Tzadok gives his beautiful approach. Listen to this. Such a beautiful thing. Lokach mesechtas brachas hiaschala mishas. We begin Shas with the mesechta of brachas. She'ikra kol, because the primary, absolute, foundational, axiomatic principle, which of course Reb Tzadok was the primary disciple of the Mei HaShiloach, and so therefore when he says she'ikra kol, it goes back to what the Mei HaShiloach says when he says over here that Zeu Iker, it's the same Iker, right? That Reb Tzadok learned from the Mei HaShiloach. Fascinatingly enough, Tzikas HaTzadik, which is one of Reb Tzadok's primary works in terms of his philosophy and in terms of the foundational approach to Avodas Hashem, was written only 1 year after he met the Mei HaShiloach. It wasn't years later after he was already, a big Hasidic Rebbe. It was written 1 year after, and so predominantly it wasn't the product of his own thoughts, but it was really mamish founded very, very heavily on the hashpa of the Ishbitzer. We know Reb Tzadok wasn't a chassid right before he came to the Ishbitzer. He was a renowned gaon, but he wasn't connected to Hasidus Bechlal. Then he met the Ishbitzer, a whole long story about how he was going to get a heter Mei Rabbanim, right, to divorce his wife, and he went around from place to place getting signatures, and he came to Ishbitz. That why he wanted to divorce his wife is a separate sugya. But he came to Ishbitz, and once he was there and he met the Ishbitzer, his entire life was completely transformed. The one Shabbos and a Shalashudas drasha that he was hearing, and he screamed out, "The Rebbe's pouring acid on my soul." A whole story, and from then he never left Ishbitz, and he remained there, and he became a Talmud. So 1 year later, he's writing these words, and it's clear that he's being yonik from the Ishbitzer, and I would venture to say from this piece of the Ishbitzer that we just learned that that the Mei HaShiloach tells us that the Iker Hakol, that the primary thing is to remember the nosein haTorah, is to remember the mashpia. So he says the main thing is das alekei avicha. Is the first thing is to become acquainted with this being that we're entering into a relationship with. Va'achar kach avdehu, because that's the pasuk. Das alekei avicha ve'avdehu. Says the Heilige Reb Tzadok, the beginning and the initial stage in that process needs to be to first be aware of who it is that we're serving. To first become acquainted, so to speak, a little bit, to think about and to understand that that there's a call that comes out, shuvu banim shevavim, that the Master of the World wants us to serve Him. He's calling us into a relationship. Okay, how can I figure out how to serve you? But it's not just a matter of a rote checklist, of a robotic sort of rote way of going through Avodas Hashem, just to check things off and to make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. We have to realize it's a relationship, and once we build that foundation and that infrastructure of this relationship, memela of Deyu, then it can go and serve Him. The main thing is to understand who it is that we're serving, and to speak to Him, and to enter in consciously into a relationship with Him, to speak to Him all the time, and to thank Him for everything, and to speak in our own words, hispodedos, and to constantly express our love for Him, and to constantly express our commitment to Him and our yearning to be close to Him. That's the ikra kol, and then everything else is built on that foundation. And he says this is why we make brachas before we do things. This is the concept of the bracha, because the pasuk says that in all of your ways you should know Him, and that's the bechina of das alekei avicha va'avdeyu, and to then go ahead and serve Him. But the bracha that we're making is to activate the aspect of bechol drechecha da'ehu, of being able to understand who it is that we're serving before we eat something, which is also a service. And before we go ahead and are doing any of the mitzvahs, the bracha that we make is to establish that premise of a relationship. Because of a Rambam, like the Rambam writes. And this is accomplished through the bracha that we make. And this is what Chazal say, an amazing thing. Shiur ba katan shiodea lemim avarch. When do we go ahead and start being mechanach a katan to make brachas? Different mitzvahs have a different a benchmark, right, and a different standard for when we're going ahead, and a different law and halacha for when we're starting to be mechanach children. For example, tefillin is from when the child is able to keep a guf naki, right? And different people have a different minhag. One that is bo bayom, mamash on the bar mitzvah, a month before, v'chulei. But that's the inyan of tefillin. When do we start initiating a child into bracha, say Chazal? At the point sheyodea lemi mevarchin. At the point when he recognizes and understands, or she recognizes and understands, lemi mevarchin, who they are blessing. And so Reb Tzadok sees over here that the premise of brachas is that a person should be odea lemi mevarchin, that a person should remember who it is that we're serving, who it is that we're blessing, who it is that we're attributing all bracha to say that you are the ata shorish, right? Shall kol bracha. For example, right? By the other mitzvahs, we don't find that we start putting tefillin on a boy at the time that he realizes for whom we're putting on tefillin. Dafka brachas, because that's what the essence of a bracha is to pause before we do something, whether it be a physical activity, or whether it be a spiritual activity, whether it be a mitzvah. And we make a bracha because in that bracha we're accomplishing the bechina of da es elokei avicha, and then acher kach, after the bracha of deo, we go ahead and we do that ma'isa. Mivur. Shaha bracha, from here we see, says Reb Tzadok, it's clear that the very, very concept of a bracha is ikra hayadil lemim avarchin shal kach noista. The foundation of making a bracha is for the purpose of what? Is for the purpose of recognizing who it is that we're serving. V'zeu haschalas hachnisa l'Torah. And this, says Reb Tzadok, is not just the haschala of mitzvah observance, right? Or of eating, or of anything that we're doing in life that's going to enable us to serve a Kadosh Baruch Hu, to give us strength, eating and drinking, for example. But this is the knisa l'Torah. Kamashakasav Reishis Chachma is Yiras Hashem. The very, very beginning, Chazal described this as the archway to be able to enter in, right? To be able to enter into the chambers of Torah. Reishis Chachma is Yiras Hashem. And Yiras Hashem doesn't just mean that we're fearful of God. It's a very weak translation. To cower in a corner from a Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to hit you or something. Yiras Shomayim means awe. To be able to be conscious and aware of a Kadosh Baruch Hu's overwhelming grandeur and presence every split second. To be overwhelmed with awe. Yiras Hashem. Yiras Shomayim. And that Yiras Shomayim is the das elokei avicha, to be aware of His presence, that He's real, that He wants a relationship with us. And that's what the bracha is. Yiras Shomayim hu al yidei shivisi Hashem l'negdi samid, like it says, like the Ramah tells us right in the beginning of Ar Chaim. And there's a reason that it's in the beginning of Ar Chaim, because that's the knisa. Because again, that's the bracha, so to speak, for all of the millions of prati dinim. And throughout the Arba Chalkei Shulchan Aruch, it must begin with Reishis Chachma, is Yiras Hashem. And the Yiras Hashem is the bechin of the bracha that you make. Every time we learn that Agah, Shavisi Hashem l'negdi samin, da es elokei avicha, v'acher kach, v'avdeyu. V'hainu bracha shekulam maschilim l'shan noichach. And he says that's mamash what a bracha is, that it begins b'loshan noichach, baruch ata. V'aschalas habracha tzarech liyas Hashem is baruch nochach einav. HaKadosh Baruch Hu needs to be in front of our eyes. That's what a bracha is. Baruch ata. We should be conscious of this. We should be conscious when we're saying a bracha. Baruch, first of all, that this thing is receiving vitality from you, that you're giving it to me. Not that you gave it to me, which is already a madrega, but that you're literally giving it to me right this instant. You package this for me. You love me. You want that I should continue to go ahead and to struggle and to strive to serve you. That's the baruch. And then mamish ata, mamish, to realize that you're real, that you exist, and that you're calling upon me to literally relate to you like I relate to another person. And I say, hey, you over there. Mamish, hine ze elekeinu, like the tzaddikim point their fingers, that they are able to recognize that Kadosh Baruch Hu is mamish in front of their eyes, feeling all of reality. And that's the bracha b'lashon noichach. Da esadikei avicha va'avdeyu. Reishis chachmas Yiras Shomayim. Shavisi Hashem l'negdi summit begin Shulchan Aruch. V'hasim lashon nister the beyond nelam. And then afterwards we finish the bracha. Melech ha'olam. We go out from that baruch ata and we begin to refer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu as l'shonos that are not b'nochach. Not that we're talking to him anymore, so to speak, because take it from miyad, we lose that. But for that moment in the haschala, when a person opens a Gemara to learn, when a person is holding food in his hand, at least in the haschala, that it should be with the recognition that I am relating to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what my whole premise is. That's what the whole purpose is. That's the foundation. That's the beginning. That's the haschala. That's the reishis chachma, is the Yiras Hashem. Like both the Nefesh HaChaim and the Tanya say. Mamish, I tell people all the time, the places that Nefesh HaChaim and the Tanya diverge is very, very, very slight. Very slight. You can find you countless places where they say almost the same lashon with the same exact thing. Mamish. And I wrote an article about that divergence, and it's only a matter of perspective, not a matter of a machlokes b'shorish. And so both of them say mamish that at the beginning of learning, a person has to be conscious to remember that I'm connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then afterwards, you get involved in the learning. You can't constantly be thinking all the time. The Chabadsker Rabbeim and the Tzaddikim used to take a little break in the middle of learning and to refresh. I love you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'm connected to you. I'm doing this for you. And then to continue learning. Beseder. But at least in the beginning, at least to make a bracha on the limud. That's what Chazal tell us. Of the Aretz. Why was Yerushalayim destroyed? Because they didn't make a bracha on the beginning of Torah. And that's really the shorish of the Beis Hamikdash. That's the shorish of the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what we're missing. That's the princess that's lost. It's the bracha. We have all the halachas in Shulchan Aruch, the halachas in Shulchan Aruch, but it's the first sif that we're missing. It's the Anochi Hashem Elokecha, no nafshi ksav yahavis. Don't forget about me. It's the bracha that we're missing. It's the Yiras Shomayim that we're missing, and it's all those things that are so difficult to perceive. They're imperceptible. Because on the outside it looks like a person is a bit bucky and shas with paiskim. And on the outside it looks like a person went ahead and he's eating food and we assume that the person is making a bracha on the food. But what kind of bracha? There's a certain spiritual, ethereal presence that we're able to bring into our avodas, whether it's eating, whether it's drinking, whether it's learning, whether it's mitzvah observance, when we pause for a second and when we relate to the master of the world whom we're trying to serve, and all of a sudden it's a different eating, and it's a different drinking, and it's a different learning, and it's a different davening, and it's a different fill in the blank. Every single aspect of our lives. B'chol drachecha da'ehu. But the ehu needs to come first. And that's the Sif Aleph in Shulchan Aruch Mamish. And that's the Haggadah Ramah that says right in the beginning that it's Shavisi Hashem l'negdi summit. This is the primary principle and the premise. That's why it's first, because it's the Reishis Chachma, is the Yiras Hashem. And that's what with Siyata D'Shmai, with the Lost Princess Initiative, we're trying to bring back. That's what the focus is. Be'ez Hashem, the book is taking longer than we expected, but we're trying the best that we can to get the book out. And I really believe and I hope and I daven and I pray that it's going to be L'To'elas to help clarify these things, to provide a sort of textbook on this topic, to focus us in on what we're missing. What I shouldn't say we, I'm sure you all have it. What I am missing, and what I'm striving to search for, and what I'm striving to find and to discover, and that within the searching, just being aware of it is already a little bit tasting the princess. Is already a little bit tasting the inning of finding, and that's one of the Lost Princess principles, the 25 core ideas, Be'ez Hashem, that will be publicizing. Is that searching is finding. It's in the search, it's in the attempt, it's in the struggle, it's in the knowledge that this is an ideal in my life that I'm trying to come to, that creates the kalim, that already that which we're trying to attain settles into those vessels a little bit and brings our entire Avodas Hashem to life, because we need to be conscious of it, and that's what we're trying to get to, and that's mamish what it is. That's mamish what it is. Of course, a person is not able to live with this understanding, so to speak, all the time, to be overwhelmed. Rabbi Nachman says in Torah Dalet and Torah Samachay and other places that it has to be baratz of a shoy. It can't be bottled to the Ein Sof all the time. A person has to live a life in this world, right? So it's constantly called magas ve'ena magas, right? It's constantly mati v'loy mati, touching and not touching. Ratz of a shoy, but I'll call panim in the beginning, and this is super important. We open a sefer, stop for a second, make a bracha on it. That's what Birchas HaTorah is. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says we destroy the Beis Hamikdash, which is the Bechin of Malchus, which is the princess, which is Shabbos Kodesh. All of these things, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, if you forgot me, so then forget about it. Forget it. The whole thing is over. The whole thing is pointless. It says that I couldn't say it in myself. It would be a pacha to say that. The Mei HaShiloach says, Lo klum. It's nothing. You're a bookshelf. It's beautiful. But what about the connection? What about the relationship? And that's the most important thing. The last 5 minutes, let's just try to chop around this Kedushas Levi. Very quickly, it's a short little piece, but I think it's super important. On a different topic, to depart a little bit from this idea, which is so foundational, and to enter into the world of Berditcha for a minute. Zog the Heilige Kedushas Levi says, Moshe Rabbeinu to Am Yisrael, standing on the threshold of entering Eretz Yisrael with the last couple of minutes we have left. When you'll say in your heart, well, these nations are so much bigger than I am. How am I going to be able to conquer them? Don't be afraid. Al tira. V'al techas. Don't tremble. Listen to this, what he says. We don't have time. Let's try to go through it quickly. One of the things that Hasidus brought to the world is that these psukim aren't just a historical document to teach us what Moshe Rabbeinu told to Am Yisrael then, but the whole Torah is given la'asher yeshnu payayim la'asher einam payayim. Right, like we said in a previous shiur, right? I think in parshas Devarim, I think it was, where we talked about the final generation Tshuva, right, which is also this week's parsha by Eikev Tishmo, and it's all about the heel, it's all about the Ikvus of the Mashiach, that all of these words were spoken to us. So even though we may not physically be on the banks of the Yarden, we all experience this in our own lives, that we're trying to access the Eretz Yisrael of living, we're trying to access the Eretz Yisrael of relationships, we're trying to access the Eretz Yisrael that we spoke about, which is the princess, which is the bracha, so to speak, in Avodas Hashem. By the way, just to return to the previous piece, it's obvious, but that's how the Reb Tzadok answers the question of why brachas is the first Masechta in Shas, right? Because obviously brachas needs to be first, because brachas is the headquarters, so to speak, for the concept of das elikicha of elikei avicha v'avdeo. So the same way Shulchan Aruch starts with Shavisi Hashem Lanagdi Samid, because Reishis Chachma Yiras Hashem, Memela Shas needs to begin also with this Masechta of brachas to remind us that the main thing is Shabercha B'Torah Tchila, to make that bracha and to recognize who it is that we're learning from. Just to knock that point home in case that wasn't clear. Okay, but this is what, so we're trying to access the Eretz Yisrael of living. And so we look and we see tremendous obstacles. We look and we see tremendous barriers and challenges and difficulties that we face. That a person should not be afraid. A person should be filled with bitachon. A person should be filled not just with trust that God will help you, but with trust that if HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave you this obstacle, it means that He put it within you, and within your heart of fire, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave you the ability to overcome and to transcend. And to find a way, whether it's over, whether it's under, whether it's through, but that you can get through this. To have bitachon atzmi, to have confidence, what the Ishbitzer calls tkufas, to have strength, what the Rabbi Nachman calls azas to Kedusha, the holy stubbornness, after falling 1,000 times, to get back up and to begin anew and to say, okay, this is it. Mamish, this is it. What are you, insane? You're insane to say such a thing? This is going to be the time? But a person has to be filled with this strength to believe that, okay, makes no difference. Masha haya haya. Ein va'ata l'lashon tshuva, Chazal tell us. Every time we have the word and now, it's a lashon of tshuva to say, right now I'm beginning. It makes no difference what was. Right now I can do this. Not to be fearful, not to be afraid of these tremendous obstacles and barriers that exist and that stand attempting to prevent us from conquering Eretz Yisrael. And when a person has such an approach, and when a person goes with confidence, and when a person says, I don't believe all of the seductions that you're telling me, that you're whispering into my ear, that you're too weak, that you can't handle it. When a person stands up strong, lo yazik lo. It's all, like Rabbi Nachman says in a number of places, particularly in Mem Vav and Tinyana, in Kuf Tes Vav, a famous Torah, that it's all an illusion. It's all these barriers that were put up by the king to test our resolve. But if we want and if we're courageous, we can walk through them without a question. And he says this is what the pasuk is telling us. And this, by the way, is Chasidus, Mamish. The Chasidus is not just going ahead and telling us a nice pshetel and a nice Torah. It's trying to bake into us that these psukim that were spoken to Am Yisrael in a historical sense is spoken to each and every one of us, that the Master Lord is whispering into my ear, that He cares about me, not just the nation, that there's hashgacha klalis on me, and He's speaking to me and He's giving me strength all the time. This is the pasuk. This is our remes pasuk, but this will finish. You'll say in your heart, again, it's talking about us, that we look at the Eretz Yisrael of living, and we look at a connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we look at consciousness, and we look at relationships with life, and with chiyas, and with love, and with passion, and we look at every aspect of life that we want to be brought to life, mamish, that I shouldn't be surviving, but I should be living, and I say I can't. Says the Heilige Berditchever, that's okay. And this is so deep. The Berditchever is giving us a space for our fear. And to say, I hear you. I accept that. And that's okay. It's okay to be afraid. It's normal to be afraid. It is healthy to have that natural tendency to be fearful. Rishai Atalermik. And the Berditchever gives you permission. He gives you space. And then he tells us, Rakatar Nois an Eitzah, but the Torah gives you an Eitzah. V'zeu haremes. Eicha uchalai rishim is not just that Am Yisrael is saying, I'm afraid of the Goyim, and therefore, right? What am I afraid of? That I'm not going to be able to conquer them. But the Torah is giving us an eitzah. And you'll say in your heart of hearts, that I can't deal with the eitzah, and I can't deal with the taivas, and I can't deal with the challenges, and I can't deal with the obstacles that I face in any area of life. The Torah says, you want to know how you're going to be able. Again, this is not you speaking, but the Torah is speaking to you, giving you advice. The whole Torah is advice. Tariag Atan Dioraisa, the 613 pieces of advice. It's not rules, it's not laws, it's advice. To get close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to live the most wonderful life. The Torah gives an eitzah. Eicha uchalei rishem. Koloimar Torah nois an eitzah. Eicha uchalei rishem. Koloimar al yedei zet uchalei rishem. What follows is going to enable you to conquer them. And the answer is la yisira mehem. And it's not just, don't be afraid of them. That is how you're going to conquer them. It's with the courage, and it's with the self-confidence, and it's with the knowledge that the master of the world has a relationship with you, and doesn't give you challenges that you can't overcome, and that fills your life all of the time with spiritual energy, that he's keeping you alive, that he's giving you strength. It's because he believes in you. So, Memela, Eicha Uchala Rishem, you want to know, each and every one of us, we have to fill in the blank with our name, because God is speaking to us. He knows of us, and he relates to us, and he loves us. And the answer is Lo Sir Mehem, mein Kind, my child, don't be afraid. And if you'll go with that strength, so then you'll be able, you'll be able to conquer. It's a chaval that we're not able to see this piece from Rabbi Nachman. I'll just end by saying it is imperative, not just maybe when you have time, it is imperative to log on to Sefaria or some website. Excuse me, if you don't have a Sefer Likutei Moharan, which you should also have, that's also imperative. But to locate this lesson, Likutei Moharan Tinyana, Mem Ches 48, and not just to read it once, whether it's in the English or in the Hebrew, preferably in the Hebrew, and try to follow along with the English, but to see the Rebbe's words, not just twice, but literally 5 to 10 times. Review it, bake it into yourself. This Torah that we're not having the ability right now because we're out of time to learn together. Be'ez Hashem, in the future we'll have Be'ez Hashem many opportunities. Hopefully, and I say this all the time, in person, not over Zoom, but we should be sitting together, Be'ez Hashem Yerushalayim Habenuya, Bekar of Mamish. But it is imperative to learn this lesson by Breslovers. It's called Igeres Maharan. Like there's Igeres Haramban, there's Igeres Maharan. This is his letter where he speaks to each and every one of us, giving us strength that without this strength that Rabbi Nachman is teaching us, if I hadn't learned this, I don't know where I'd be today. It's this inyan, it's this lesson. And so we're out of time. I'm going to stop the share. I see somebody's raising their hand. I don't know exactly what this means or how to unmute whoever it is that's raising their hand. I probably don't know how to work this thing properly, but we will try Be'ezer Hashem to open the floor, I guess, at a different time. The Yid raised his hand and now he left. I guess he was saying bye. I don't know, raising a hand can mean a question, it also means waving. I don't know. But regardless, I appreciate everybody, mamish, for tuning in, and I'll say, to end, like I always say, that loy ha'ikar halimud ela hamaisa. The main thing is not to learn it, but to really try to put this stuff into practice. To really attempt as much as we can to create that little bit of a break before we do anything, and to connect with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, to recognize what we're doing this for. What's the purpose in all this? What's the tachlis? Mamash, what's the tachlis? And to become conscious Jews that are connected with the princess, the Ezra Hashem. Okay, thank you so much for tuning in. Jacob, Gary, all the chevra. Deborah, Devorah, thank you so much. Rachie, Scott, Yoel, all the Chaver, thank you so much for learning with us. Mamash, I appreciate it very, very much. It means so much to me. Okay, so I'm wishing you the most beautiful, beautiful Shabbos, and I wish you to live this way with Hashem's help. Thank you so much. Gary, again, it's Mamash wonderful, wonderful to see you.